everyone, welcome to GST with Saradha. Well, it's a very normal human tendency to always ask these two questions, why and why not. So we always want to understand the purpose of why should we do something and why should we not do something. On a very similar line, today we are going to discuss one such compliance in GST on why we have to match GSTR 1 with GSTR 3B. Right? So of late you would have received a lot of messages, at least in fact in the last 1 year almost you would have been always receiving this message of why GSTR 1 should always be matched with GSTR 3B, and today we are going to dive deep into the topic to understand why your outward taxable supply and the tax liability declared in GSTR 1 should always be matching with your GSTR 3B, and what are all the mechanisms towards it and what happens if you don't. And why is it better to be always safe than to be sorry, right? So let's get on to it. Rolling back, Finance Act 2021, which was proposed in Budget 2021 in February, right? So after the budget, we had this finance bill, and in the finance bill there are a couple of amendments in GST law. One such important amendment is in Section 75, subsection 12. So let's understand what is this Section 75 all about. As we all know, Section 73 and 74. 73 is about the assessment procedure for non-fraudulent cases, and 74 is for assessment procedure for fraudulent cases, right? So what this Section 75 subsection 12 says is that irrespective of what is there in 73 or 74, which means notwithstanding anything contained in Section 73 or Section 74. So, irrespective of that, whenever there is a tax liability which has been self-assessed through GSTR 3B, which is under Section 39, then it is directly something which is qualifying to be recovered under Section 79. So, Section 79 is the recovery procedure which has been prescribed for demands which has been finalized. So, let us understand the mechanism in a simple way. Typically what happens is that whenever there is any tax liability which has been identified, first you will receive an intimation. So intimation will be normally sent in ASMP 10, or you call it as DRC01B, whatever it is. So there is an intimation. So once the intimation is provided, you have the option to either respond or you can pay the tax liability, and after which it will be followed by a show cause notice if it is not accepted. So there is a show cause notice under Section 73 or Section 74, for which you will be given 30 days of time limit, and you can submit a response within this 30 days, and also there will be a personal hearing. Basically an opportunity of being heard will be given. And after this 30 days from the show cause notice, if the officer is not satisfied with your explanation and if you are not paying the liability as well, then the officer has the power to pass an order. So after the order has been passed, you still have the option of going for a further appeal, right, to the appellate authority within 3 months time, and there is also further extension of 1 month for this appeal condemnation, which means you still have like 3 to 4 months for filing the appeal procedure. And if you are still not going for preferring an appeal, you have neither preferred an appeal nor you have discharged the tax liability which has been given by the order, then only then it takes the color of a demand which can be recovered by the tax officer. So when I say recovery, it means typically it can be in the form of attaching the bank account or the property and all those stuff, right? So for this kind of recovery procedure to happen, all these steps have to be taken care. So only after that the demand freezes and the officer has the authority to correct or to recover the demand. So here what we are talking about is an exception to all of these. So Section 75 subsection 12 states that it is an exception, it is a self-assessed tax, which means what? The taxpayer, he himself has declared it in his GSTR 1 that this is my outward tax liability. So based on his own self-declaration in GSTR 1, if that is not getting discharged in his own GSTR 3B, then it takes the color of a self-assessed tax liability, which means you have already assessed your tax. It's not that I am asking you to pay this tax liability. It's not that I have to ask you to pay this, right? So you yourself assessed your own tax liability, which is a self-assessed tax liability. So that has been declared in GSTR 1, and if that has not been fully discharged in GSTR 3B, then the difference is nothing but your self-assessed tax liability, right? So let us say for an example, 10 lakhs has been declared in your GSTR 1, out of which only 8 lakhs has been paid in GSTR 3B. So to the extent of this 2 lakhs of difference, it is nothing but a self-assessed tax liability. So such kind of an explanation clause has been already inserted by this Finance Act Amendment 2021, and that has been made effective in the Act with effect from 1st January 2022. Naturally, the next question from the industry is that there can be chances of inadvertent errors, isn't it? So I might have declared it by mistake. There could have been some errors. So which means I don't have the option to rectify it as well. Once the GSTR 1 has been filed, the taxpayer does not have the option to rectify or to reopen or revisit or edit that GSTR 1. So which means once the return has been filed, it's finalized. You only have the option to rectify it in the next return. There is no revision option. You can only, the rectification mechanism happens for any error or omission only through the GSTR 1 or 3B that is filed for the next, the consequent period, right? So on these lines, if at all there is any inadvertent error, which means it could be due to typo error or whatever it is, there is no intentional mistake, okay, there is no intention to wrongly declare your tax liability, but just that there is a mistake which has happened, which means I have time to correct it until next financial year October month return, which is filed within 30th November, isn't it? The law gives me ample amount of time. In that case, how can you recover this tax, without giving me that time? This is exactly what is the question which has been placed. So to address this question, even though this, explanation clause has been inserted way back in 1st January 2022, by and large it has not been made operational by the tax officers, and the procedures and the manner has not also been prescribed at large. And then what happens is that in the GST Council recommendation of the 48th meeting, they have also come out with further amendment in the rule. Rule 18C has been introduced with effect from 26th December 2022. When this rule has been introduced, what this rule typically talks about is that, so if you have a difference between GSTR 1 and GSTR 3B, and your GSTR 1 is higher than GSTR 3B, to that extent, so the extent can be in terms of amount or in terms of a percentage. So these things have still not been notified. So just that the rule has been placed already. The rule says that the government will notify what is the threshold limit. It could be in absolute amount or it could be in the form of a percentage. The difference, that is GSTR 1 being higher than GSTR 3B, then you will receive an intimation. This intimation will be given to you in DRC01B. So this intimation basically gives you two options. Option number 1, either you can accept the liability. Yes, to this extent I have shortly paid the liability, so let me pay this liability now. So which means you have to pay it through a voluntary payment in DRC03. So you can pay that liability along with interest under section 50. So this is option number 1. Option number 2 is, or you can submit an explanation stating why is there a difference, and probably this difference is because of some past error being rectified now, or some mistake which has happened now which I am proposing to rectify in the future. So something of that sort could be possible, right? So they are giving you an option either to pay the liability or to give an explanation, right? But the important point here is you get only 7 days to do this action, to take this action. So within the 7 days from the date on which this DRC01B has been intimated in the portal, as well as you will also be receiving an email, right? So once this has been given to you, you have only 7 days of time to either respond or to pay the tax liability. If you fail to do either of these two actions, then this liability gets frozen as a demand, right? So once it is a demand, the officer has the power to recover this money under section 79. So now what has happened further is that very recently through notification 38/2023, dated 4th August 2023, there is basically a new rule which has been further inserted. So this is rule 142B, right? So what this rule says is that, so either because of this section 75 subsection 12 read along with 88C, or because of any other demand which has been frozen under section 79. So if at all there is a demand recovery mechanism, how the mechanism operates, that is what has been prescribed in this section, in this rule 142B. So 142B states that basically the officer will give you an intimation. Remember, this is not an intimation for your tax liability ascertainment. This intimation is for the recovery procedure. So the officer will give you an intimation asking you, directing you to make the payment within 7 days time. If you fail to make the payment, and he will also parallelly be creating a liability in the electronic liability ledger, right? So basically we have these three ledgers, e-cash ledger, e-credit ledger and e-liability ledger. So in the electronic liability ledger, the officer will also create a liability for you to make the tax payment, right? Along with this, you will also be given an intimation. The intimation will be in DRC01B. So remember, we have already come up to D, A, B, C, D. So DRC01A is for a normal. I am just giving a quick recap to understand all these four terminologies or these four forms. So DRC01A is for the officer to give a normal intimation for a tax liability ascertainment before show cause notice. So DRC01B is basically an intimation whenever there is a difference between GSTR1 outward tax liability and GSTR3B outward tax liability, and DRC01C is when there is any difference between your ITC availed as per GSTR3B versus GSTR2B, and now this is DRC01D, which is an intimation which the officer will give for initiating the demand recovery procedure. So basically he is going to give you 7 days time for you to discharge the tax liability, and if you fail to discharge the tax liability, he is going to make the proceedings under all other relevant provisions of the Act along with the rule. So which means it can be in the form of your bank account attachment or your property, getting attached, whatever it is, right? So the important point here to remember is that what can be a simple normal compliance of ensuring that your GSTR1 is matching with your GSTR3B. If the normal tax compliance is, there is a gap in that compliance and there is a failure, it can lead to a recovery proceedings, which means, even your bank account can get attached. To that extent, the law has been continuously being amended. So right now, if you are filing any GSTR1 or GSTR3B, the important, moral of the story is that, so start filing your GSTR1 properly, accurately. So obviously, it has to start with properly maintaining your, transaction records in the books of accounts and properly raising your e-invoices, because if your e-invoices are appropriate, automatically it gets generated in your GSTR1 itself, isn't it? So make sure that you have a robust system to ensure that your invoices are being appropriately recorded, so that your GSTR1 is being filed accurately without any mistakes. So this is point number 1. Point number 2, while filing your GSTR3B, make sure that whatever has been declared in GSTR1 is appropriately discharged in GSTR3B without any mistakes, without any errors, right? Now, point number 3, if at all you failed, if at all there is a mistake where you fail to pay some tax liability, make sure that once your GSTR1B has been generated, the tax liability is being paid along with applicable interest. Now, if you think it's not just something which has been missed out, but rather a proper, rectification out of past errors, or let us say there is an inadvertent error for which you want to take the opportunity to correct it in your GSTR1 in the upcoming month, in the succeeding month, then make sure that you actually respond to this DRC01B within the given 7 days time. But important point is, do not ignore this DRC01B. It is a very, very critical intimation, because it's not like your DRC01A intimation where if at all you fail, it's only going to be followed with a show cause notice. And then again, after show cause notice, you get 30 days time, and then you have this, appeal and all those stuff. But here, the problem here is that if you fail to respond for this DRC01B, then it automatically takes the color of a demand which can be recovered by the officer. It's not that it's going to be followed by a show cause notice, order, and then all these other procedures are not applicable. It's a direct demand recovery because it's your directly self-assessed tax. So please do remember to ensure that your filing is perfectly done, and whenever you receive this DRC01B for any difference, please do not panic. You don't need to rush to the officer. You don't need to do anything beyond just responding in the portal. That response can be either in the form of discharging the tax liability or in the form of providing an explanation in the portal itself. So all that you need to do is within the 7 days time, make sure that you respond for this DRC01B. So that is the bottom line here. Make sure that your tax compliances are appropriate in order to avoid any kind of consequences. So when your compliances are proper, you may not have any of these kind of consequences. Happy filing and stay tuned for more videos from GST with Saradha. Thank you so much.